Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to ask an awful lot of questions. You can also visit us at thebittertruth.info and get some information there. Watch the shows or listen to the shows because we're not a video thing. Listen to the shows there. We usually use YouTube over there, but you can also listen to us on Spotify and iTunes and everything else. If you go to thebittertruth.info, you can actually help us out at the show. You can click the donate button for a one-time shot, or if you want to register at patreon.com/thebittertruth, that would be awesome. And all help is appreciated. I'm noticing that shows that I like and shows that I'm fans of are getting screwed up on the algorithm if they're not getting deplatformed entirely. So given that, we're not some massive show like Jimmy Dore or anything, I don't know how much of it, is algorithms and how much of it is just, people don't like to listen about politics and social crap. So there's that. But like I said, you enjoy the show, appreciate the support. As always, these shows are available for free and they're evergreen. So it doesn't matter really when you listen to them. If you go back in the catalog, we've been on the air for about 3 years now in June. So anyway, I wanted to jump into a couple of things. I've had a text thread with some friends of mine the last few days talking about Biden's latest, the American Relief Package, the ARP, and that was New Deal that he wants to kick in. That these reforms are progressive and this and that and the other. They're not. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Some of the other things that I've been hearing bandied about is these are the biggest reforms since FDR. They're not. And, here's a quick preview when I get to that section of the show. There's nothing systemic about these reforms. There's not a goddamn thing systemic about these reforms. Nothing is going to change systemically. And most of these reforms are going to end in September or at the end of the year. Anyway, that being said, why shouldn't we be surprised? Well, first of all, I hate to burst your little bubble, but if you think that the Democratic Party is the party of the people, it's not. Never has been. And initially from 1792 to 1834, it was called the Democratic Republican Party. When Jefferson and Madison were running things there, George Washington ran as an independent. Didn't think he needed a party because, after all, he was George Washington, kind of like Eisenhower in 1952. He's like, yeah, D-Day, fuck you. I'm not going to be in the debates. But Washington ran as an independent, and kind of at the end of his term, almost like Eisenhower did at the end of his term, talking about the military-industrial complex, Washington warned us about parties. He said that they weren't going to be good for the country. They were going to divide the country. And, you always hear this shit about unity and, we're not unified anymore. And we've never been unified. White people have been unified. White people have been unified in being white people. But if you ask, people of color, which is a stupid phrase, but if you ask Black, brown people, American Indians, Native Americans, whatever you want to call people these days, they will tell you that there's definitely two Americas. And even if in a class ascension, if you're a Black person and you've been able to make it into an income class, there's still going to be challenges being Black in this country. You still will get randomly stopped, like some of my friends do, who, like me, are middle-aged bald guys who golf. So, there's that. But in any case, the Democratic Party has always been, despite Jefferson, trying to do the freedom dividend and all these kind of quasi-socialist things that people like to give him credit for, which I do, but the Democratic Party has always been a slave pro-war corporate party. It has never been anything but that. I'm not going to say I don't know where, mythology, especially in this country, because we're more attached to images and film and TV than we are to the print media. We don't read print much these days. Let's just face it, a New York Times bestseller is not the same thing as, Jay-Z with downloads. It's just not the same thing. We just don't read anymore. But the party has always been a slave corporate party. And, the language of the day, it always changes. But let's just, kind of move through a brief history of the last century. And I'll use a couple of examples before I get into Biden in the present day, because what we lost in this country which started with Woodrow Wilson. What we lost in this country was a true left. We lost a true conscience of capital, because this country has always been a capitalist country. And for those of you who think capitalism is immutable, it's not. We used to have a feudal system before capitalism showed up, and it changed, and nobody lost their shit, and nobody thought, oh my God, my identity is over. For some reason, Americans get really pissed off when you talk about changing capitalism, because they think you think they suck, or that the country sucks, or whatever. And it's just a system, man. It's like if you go to the library and they have the Dewey Decimal System, that's a great system. I like the Dewey Decimal System. It makes things easy to find. But if they decided to go alphabetical by author, my life wouldn't be that much different. Or if they decided to go alphabetical by title, my life wouldn't be that much different. Of course, every library would be different, because some libraries would go by author and some would go by title. But let's start with Woodrow Wilson real quick, because he was quote a Democrat, but he was a warmongering piece of shit. He lied to get us into World War I. The Lusitania was a joke. It took 2 years, by the way, to talk us into World War I after that incident. Shows you how much people cared, because not 50 years before, we were in a civil war in this country. And not 20 years before, we were in the Spanish-American War, which, although 4 months, guys still died there. And that was started on a lie, too, by Warren G. Harding, who got us to lie about the USS Maine and got us into the Spanish-American War. That's for another time. So Wilson lied about the Lusitania, got us into World War I, was the first president to show a movie in the White House. And if you don't know what that movie was, it should be very telling of who this person was. He showed Birth of a Nation, which was a D.W. Griffith film, which, if you've never seen it, and I do recommend seeing it, it was kind of the first big major long form motion picture, one of the first ones. Because up until then, Chaplin would make these 8 and 12-minute shorts, and everybody made little shorts that would run at the movie theater. You didn't see these big stories really till about, I think, 1909, 1910. So Birth of a Nation was basically a propaganda film for the Ku Klux Klan. They come in to save the day. They kill a black guy who, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I saw this once like 30 years ago. I think he either killed or raped a white woman. And the black guy wasn't even a black guy. He was a white actor in blackface. This was the first movie to be shown at the White House. And Wilson raved about it. That was one of the best films ever made. And KKK enrollment went up from, I think, a few thousand guys in 1915-16 to somewhere around 100,000 people by the late 20s. And if you're not familiar with the KKK's grip on the South, it was near mafia-like grip. They infiltrated everything, judges, cops, you name it. So Wilson also barred, black people from federal employment. You could not have a black person apply for a job with the federal government. He jailed Eugene Debs. He invented the Espionage Act, which later Obama used dubiously, and I'm being generous there. He prosecuted 9 whistleblowers under the Espionage Act, which, if you know the Espionage Act, it has nothing to do with whistleblowing laws or being a whistleblower. It had everything to do with being a spy. But Obama, being the constitutional law professor, found a way around it. And so that's why he was able to go after guys like John Kiriakou, Chelsea Manning, chase Julian Assange into the Ecuadorian embassy. You name it, that's what he did. But it goes back to Wilson signing this piece of shit law into law in the first place. He put Eugene Debs in jail for the crime of running for president in 1916, because Debs was against the war. He was pro-labor. He was everything that, the corporate Democrat and the corporate Republican doesn't like. So Debs again ran for office from jail in 1920. Still got 1 million votes. Isn't that interesting? So there's a bunch of things that Wilson did that were largely undemocratic in scope. Demonized Germans in this country. And we went through a period of time where you could not play Beethoven or, name it. You could not play that music in American halls. German operas were banned. We started calling it not like, we went through the Freedom Prize shit during the Second Iraq War, when the French wouldn't help us out. So we got mad at the French, started calling them freedom fries instead of French fries. We did the same thing with sauerkraut. We called it freedom cabbage instead of sauerkraut. And everyone likes sauerkraut on their hot dogs, at least I do. And I know hot dogs are bad for me, so save your cards and letters. But Wilson, but not Wilson, but Edward Bernays, who was his propagandist, not unlike Goebbels under the Nazi Party, came up with all this happy horse shit, demonizing Germans and the whole 9 yards. Kind of like what we do now with Russiagate. None of this stuff is new, folks. None of this stuff is new. And people are easily led by the nose. And that's why in my dark black little heart, I think 80% of people are stupid. So that's Wilson. So we flash forward. FDR comes in, sweeping mandate. 1932 gets elected. He had to be pushed to the left. People always give him all this credit, and they'll say things like, "Well, like," and this is where I'm going to get to Biden in a second. Even FDR was an FDR, and Biden is really no FDR. But even FDR had to be pushed by two socialist parties, a communist party, and the AFL, and later the CIO. Because if he did not, he wouldn't be made dog catcher in 1936. He bragged to his brother that he saved capitalism. This is toward the end of his life. If you've read his published letters, one of his big pride and joys was that he saved capitalism, unquote, because he basically went to his rich friends and said that if we don't institute a Social Security, unemployment, a jobs program, a minimum wage, if we don't do these things, you're going to lose everything. You give up a couple of tax points, and we're able to provide for the people. Because I don't know if you've noticed, but for the last 15 years, or the last 4 or 5 years, this country has been in turmoil, right? From all the deregulation of Taft and Wilson and Coolidge. Hoover inherited the Depression because he was only president not even 6 months when the Depression went down, when the crash happened in October of 29. However, Hoover's blame to fame was the fact that he blew it. His administration blew handling. Does not sound familiar. Handling the Depression. We were in a depression, but they blew it, which is why Roosevelt won. But to get all these things done that I just listed, he needed to be pushed, which he was. And as it was, he beat Alf Langdon, who ran for president in 1936. He was a Kansas governor, if I'm not mistaken. And Roosevelt got 60% of the vote, and he took 523 electoral college votes to 8 electoral college votes. It was a slaughter. Not like Nixon McGovern or Mondale Reagan, but a slaughter. You win one state, you win 3 states, you got your ass kicked. I mean, come on. So why was it so easy to push Roosevelt with almost threatening him? Well, because he was already seeing it in the streets. Because for the previous 3-4 years, we were having labor strikes in the streets, ending in death. Pinkertons and other armed goons hired by Ford and Warner Brothers and General Motors and you name it, were shooting these guys, and these guys were shooting back. And we had just spent the previous few years dealing with bonus strikers. If you don't know what those guys are, the bonus strikers were guys who fought in World War I, which, if you recall, ended in 1919. And here we are, 1931, 1932, 1930. And they still didn't get their bonuses for going overseas. We had 500,000 people die there. And we sent like 1.5 million troops there, men and women. And the goal and the point was, if you go, you get a bonus. We never pay these guys their bonus. And now we're in a depression. They need the money. So they're at DC and they're on strike. They're protesting. And General Douglas MacArthur, that guy, shows up with the Army and the National Guard, and he's tear-gassing these guys and shooting them in the street, and it's ugly. And this did not bode well for the American press to see that on the front page of the New York Times or the Chicago Tribune. American soldiers, veterans being shot at because they just want to get their check. That was bad. So Roosevelt had to remind his rich buddies, because people forget that he came from money. He was a total blue blood. He actually threatened them and said, listen, if we don't give up a little, they're going to come for everything. They're going to take everything. And if you guys forgot, the Russian Revolution was only 15 years ago. And I'm sure most of you listening to this remember 15 years ago. If you're 25, you were in the 5th grade 15 years ago. If you're 30, you were in the 10th grade 15 years ago. If you're in your 40s, you probably, had been in a job for a while. You remember when you got your first job, when you got out of high school, you remember maybe going to college, graduating, maybe you remember finishing grad school in your mid 20s 15 years ago. That's 15 years ago. We all remember 15 years ago. Well, Roosevelt had to remind his rich buddies that 15 years ago, Russia was run by a czar whose family ran Russia for 300 years and lost it in not too short order because people were starving. The economy was shitty. Workers were getting the shaft. So Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin and all his boys, I'm not going to sing the praises like, that was so great and perfect, but that's what happens when you screw people. And we lost that in this country. I'm going to get to that in a second. But we lost that in this country. We are in a depression. We're not in a recession. When you got 20 million people out of work, we're in a depression. When before the pandemic, you have 50% of American workers who were making under 30 grand a year. When you have a minimum wage that does not provide for a 1-bedroom apartment in any county in the United States, and that includes West Virginia and Mississippi, we have problems that other industrialized nations do not have. So FDR realized that he did not want to be turned into Hoover, and fear works because of the socialist groups, because we had an active communist party in this country. Not people trying to turn this into Russia, but people trying to get better deals for workers. Because we had an AFL, because we had a CIO, right? Unions that actually worked. They weren't playing golf with management just yet. This is before all that crap happened. Even Nixon ended up becoming one of the biggest liberal presidents in the history of ever. And people always look at me quizzically when I say that. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip here. Scotch and soda, really good in the afternoon. And for those of you who've shot me a couple of texts and some little personal social media messages saying you can't call her Boozy Pelosi because, you drink during your show. And I'm like, yeah, but not that much. And I'm also not holding up a Chinese menu for my show notes. I know exactly what I'm saying for the most part, whether you like it or not. But let's look at Nixon. He was pushed by a true left. He had an active anti-war movement in this country. He had an active civil rights movement in this country that were on him all the time, like they were on Johnson. That's why Johnson didn't even run for a third term. I mean, technically, he was only president for a year, and then he won re-election, so he didn't really have a first term. But let's just call it his third term. But he didn't run because he couldn't handle it, because he didn't know what to do about Vietnam. He had expended his entire political capital that he had developed during, getting Medicare, getting the Voting Rights Act, getting the Civil Rights Act. I mean, those are big things for the first 18 months of her presidency. And he just squandered that all away. He pissed that all away with Vietnam. The Great Society that he had in mind didn't even come close. I mean, anyway, all that to say, Nixon had it on his ass too, right? And as a result, he ended up passing things that every time I say this to people, they look at me shocked. They didn't know. Excuse me, just a short list. I mean, he passed Title IX. He passed OSHA, the Occupation the Occupation Safety and Hazards Act, right? So, it keeps people from working in factories with open-toed shoes or whatever. He passed the EPA, right? He passed the Cancer Act. All the auto reforms, shatterproof glass, seatbelts, stuff that Lee Iacocca testified before Congress and said, you can't make me do this because I'm going to have to spend $3 a car to get seatbelts installed. And this was all because, and I'm not even finished. This was all because of Ralph Nader, because Ralph Nader was like, if ALEC used their forces or their powers for good versus evil, Ralph Nader had 25, 26 pieces of legislation crafted with the House and passed. That's badass stuff. And they marginalized him because the Democratic Party, which talk about in a second, later changed to become the Republican Party, which made the Republican Party batshit insane, marginalized him. And now you can't even see him barely on PBS. If you want to look at, he'll be on YouTube stuff all the time, because there's real independent journalism out there still, and they'll interview him. But Nixon desegregated more schools than Johnson did. He strengthened the Voting Rights Act, adding more provisions to it. He created policies for minority business owners and provided small business government-backed small business loans at way lower percentages than what the banks were charging. He supported affirmative action. He wasn't against that. He actually strengthened that as well. So when people sit there and they go, "Oh my God," but what, he also endorsed the ERA, right? Saying he'd sign it if it would pass. Now, I'm not an expert, but here's what happened with the ERA. They sent it to be ratified by the states. And now I don't know if this is because it's an act, but I don't remember the CARES Act last year being sent down to be ratified by the states. The House voted on it. The Senate voted on it. That was it. It didn't go to the states. I don't think the governor of California was consulted, unless I'm misunderstanding that. But the ERA is the only thing I keep hearing. It's almost like the parliamentarian. It's like an excuse. The Republicans had a bad parliamentarian that they didn't like a few years back, and they fired him. It's a hired position. It's not an elected position or anybody that's appointed even by the president. It's a hired gun. Doesn't do what you want. You fire him. It's $171,000 a year. You fire him. But anyway, so Nixon said he would sign the ERA, right? And if lest we forget that the Republican Party were more libertarian before 1976, 77, when Jerry Falwell hijacked that party. Ronald Reagan made abortion legal in California when he was governor in the 60s. Their attitude was, hey, listen, whatever's in the bedroom is none of our business. And this was pre-Roe v. Wade. So what the hell, right? And this is how far we have gone. We're right now. We are an official right-wing country, where there is no liberal, there's no conservative. It's just two corporate parties who have us fighting about gays, guns, and abortion. And instead of getting us to punch up, they got us punching sideways at each other. So we think the other guy is the enemy. And, we're not going to agree on everything, but I bet you I can find 5 things that you and I would agree on that matter to our lives. I don't care if a same-sex couple gets married. I would care if they can't, but I don't care if they do. It's none of my business. Be happy. Go do you. If you want to be married, go be married. This is where we've gotten to, where it's all identity politics has morphed into this lifestyle shit. But why was Nixon, such a quote liberal president? Well, fear again, because Nader and the movements that I mentioned were all up his ass. And there was a bit. I've seen Chris Hedges talk about this before, and I actually read this I think it was at a Target. And I didn't buy the book because I can't stand Henry Kissinger, but I was leafing through it. And there's a bit in there, 1970 or 71, where there's about 10,000 Vietnam protesters outside the White House. And DC Metro has the place surrounded with buses, and they got the National Guard out, right? And Nixon is looking at Henry Kissinger, and he's like, Henry, they're coming to get us, Henry. They're gonna jump the fence, and what will happen? They're going to kill us. That's the kind of fear our politicians should have, at least to be concerned about re-election, which he was. And I can go on about the McGovern campaign. That's a whole show unto itself. But he beat McGovern 528 electoral votes to 3, and McGovern took his own state, or he took not even his own state, took Massachusetts, and that was it. All right. And again, it wasn't because Nixon was popular or loved, but he passed things for the people. And again, whatever his motivations were, I don't care. He would not have been motivated had he not had a real left up his ass. The conscience of capital, which is what the left used to serve. The liberal church used to serve that function. Universities used to serve that function before they became de facto think tanks for the military and corporate America, before they became vocational training schools. Now what's school? Now it's college. I mean, it's all STEM now. It's a joke. I mean, I went to school for almost free. It was $100 a quarter because it was subsidized. able to take as many credits as I wanted. So yeah, I was a business major. I majored in marketing, but I also took sociology. I took philosophy. I took psychology. I mean, I had enough classes in several disciplines to get a minor if I wanted to pursue it and get another couple of classes under my belt, because I'd taken so many because I could. I took the stuff that I had to for my major. I'm like, okay, I'm going to take, marriage and family for fun, or I'm going to take, leisure and society and learn a couple things. God forbid I'm interesting at a party. But now it's all STEM. Every unit costs. My old school that was $100 a quarter. My old bass player's kid just graduated there in 2019. He was paying $7,000 a quarter. I was paying $100 a quarter. So it became a very different beach, right? But kind of back to the talk here. So you had all of these things go down, and those of you that are kind of thinking that I'm, maybe being too hard on the Democrats. First of all, I'm not being hard enough. Second of all, I would really recommend a book by Chris Hedges, came out 11 years ago, called Death of the Liberal Class. And he gets into this in a lot of detail, more detail than I can get into here in the next few minutes. But it's a fantastic book. I've read it about 4 times, and it's very detailed. And the idea that there was a left in this country that used to push capital to do the right thing, either coerce them or get them to see the light. When Roosevelt had a jobs program, right, put 12 million people to work and had a minimum wage, and companies and businesses that couldn't, quote, afford a minimum wage got subsidies. And then, they had a little shield on their window. We support America, support this business because we support America, that kind of thing. And we did that for a number of years. And those 12 million people were responsible for the freeway system. They were responsible for Mount Rushmore. I mean, you had a federal jobs program, which these Biden bills, not even close to a federal jobs program, not even close. And Biden's bills, by the way, most of the crap's going to end in September or December. A one-time tax credit for kids of $2,000. That's not $2,000 cash, right? And the last bill, the ARP, was $1.9 trillion. Well, with $1.9 trillion, you could have paid every working American over 18 a $2,000 UBI a month for 10 months. That would have gotten most people through the pandemic, and they may have screwed up their credit. Maybe they couldn't pay their bills because they're out of work, but they would have at least made rent. You're not looking at like 9 million people facing eviction. We already have almost 1 million homeless people, and we got all these people not facing eviction. But how did that happen? Well, because the Democrats became more and more concerned with playing ball with big business, and then the Clintons came, and with the Democratic Leadership Council that they started in the mid '80s with Al Gore and a bunch of other right-wing senators. Their goal was to get rid of the New Deal. Starting in 1985, they showed big business in Wall Street that they were open for business. Right. The charm of this new crew was that they could pass what Reagan and Bush could not. NAFTA was a Reagan-Bush thing. Clinton passed that. DOMA was a Reagan-Bush thing. Clinton passed that, and he went on the 700 Club and bragged about it. If that doesn't tell you who that motherfucker is. So, then the crime bill comes, which Joe Biden wrote, which people like to forget. And it amazed me this last cycle how many Black people that I knew, friends of mine, didn't know what the crime bill was. They knew parts of the 13th Amendment that said we could have prisoners be slaves, basically. But they did not know what the crime bill was, which was that sentence on steroids, because it's why we have de facto factories. It's why we have slave labor in this country. It's why state and federal prisons can hire out their prisoners and make a few bucks, and also private prisons. Half the border, half the cages, the kids in cages, half those cages are facilitated by private prison companies. So where's that beneficial, right? Clinton gutted welfare. 70% of those that were 70% of the recipients were children. Clinton did that. He gutted the Communications Act, such that you don't have a monopoly, and you don't have monopoly or antitrust rules anymore, which is why we have monopolies now on communications. It's down to 5 companies, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, where they control 90% of what Americans see, read, hear, publishers, magazines, the airwaves, books. It's pretty spooky. He gutted Glass-Steagall, deregulating the banks, which he did in 1999. And the big excuse is, oh yeah, these are ancient, tearing down the firewalls. Well, by 2008, we had a crash. You know why? Because you know what's not ancient? Greed. You know what's not ancient? Assholes trying to get away with shit. That's why we have regulations. And for those of you who got really pissed off at the protests last year, well, why do we have police? Because people break the law. That's why. The protests weren't breaking the law. The protesters were exercising actually their First Amendment rights, and the cops were beating the shit out of them and gassing them and taking situations and turning them into what they turned into. Because I noticed when the white rioters showed up at the Capitol, and reports have been coming out the last couple of months on that fracas, turns out that those people were let in by Capitol Police. Don't shoot them. If they were Black Lives Matter, what the fuck do you think would have happened? You know what the fuck would have happened. So, yeah, the Democrats who came in the late 80s and 90s and went so far right that they pushed the Republicans to go batshit insane. Right. So, and despite the feel your pain, I'll feel your pain. I know exactly what you're going through. Right. Clinton turned out to be a total washout, one of the worst presidents we've ever had. And then Bush was one of the worst presidents we ever, and then Obama, and then Trump. I mean, it just never ends, because for 50 years we've been doing the lesser of two evils. And I swear to God, the next idiot that tells me that in the midterms, because we're not pushing any of these assholes left, we're going to be told, oh, you can't let them take the Republicans take back the House. Why not? Why not? The Democrats are doing the exact same shit the Republicans were doing. So why do I care if a bunch of careerist assholes who are not doing the job they were elected to do, which was to fight for my shit? Why do I care which party is in office? All right. Biden's a fascist. He's just a nicer fascist. He sends nicer tweets. He's a better face of America Inc. But hell, he expanded NATO into Iraq. He's doubling down in Syria. There are 2,500 troops that are coming out of Afghanistan in September. We'll see. Are still going to be, we're still leaving behind 18,000 contractors. So what does that mean? Trump made that deal last year to get out by May 1st. Biden pushed it 4 more months to get out on 9/11. But Trump also renewed contracts for contractors ending in 22 and 23. So what's the strategy there? Oh, they shot a contractor. We have to go back in there. No, we don't. How about we leave them alone? How about we leave people alone and get the fuck out of their country and buy their shit from them instead of trying to take it for free, which is what we goddamn do. But there's no semblance of a true left in this country. It's done. Any conscience of capital is eviscerated. It's finished. And the only people left, people trying to start the People's Party and everything else, I'm down. I'll give them a chance. Anyone running as a Democrat, fuck you. Love Nina Turner to pieces. She's stuck her chin out on more than one occasion. But when she said she's running for a congressional seat in Ohio for 2022, and she's going to run as a Democrat, fuck you. I'm sorry, Nina Turner, love you to pieces, but fuck you. She has enough profile. She has enough credibility. She doesn't need to run as a goddamn Democrat, because what's going to end up happening is she will win because she's popular in Ohio. And then she's going to walk right in. And on January 3rd of her first day of her first vote, she's going to vote for House Speaker Pelosi or House Speaker Steny Hoyer or House Speaker, any dipshit corporate blue Democrat asshole who thinks Medicare for all is bad and we need to stay in the wars overseas because it's not their fucking kids dying. Meet the new austerity, man. It's the same as the old austerity, We've got people out of work. We've got people that are hungry in food lines. Last year we ran out of food in food banks for the first time in 80 years. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating when you see other industrialized countries doing better than we are doing. And for Americans here to suffer from such an American exceptionalism that they think that we're fine, that we don't need to make any changes. Let me ask you a question, or let me make a suggestion. Quit saying the government and start saying the taxpayer, because the government isn't giving me anything. That's my money. That's my money. I don't have any kids. You know what I believe in? I believe that we should have federal daycare for kids up to 5 years old before they start kindergarten. I don't know why a working family has to pay anywhere from $10,000 to $40,000 a year for daycare when they pay taxes. They should be getting that as part of their taxpayer the bonus of, an American dividend or a freedom dividend, as Jefferson wanted to call it. I don't know. I did a show on this a few weeks back, asking where Andrew Yang's UBI went, but that's the same thing. I think we deserve Medicare for all. I pay taxes. Why do I have to buy a plan and then get denied things or get, approved of things, or why? My doctor said I needed this. I just interviewed a woman, Lisa Theobald, who's a Medicare for all activist. And one of the points she makes, she worked in an industry for a long time. Approval for treatment is not approval for payment. And that's where they fuck you. And that's okay with people in this country. That's okay. They don't do that in Sweden. They don't do that anywhere else. In fact, a friend of mine made this observation a few weeks back. If you ever notice, all the EU and Asian countries, former empires, once they stopped being empires and started having to pay workers and started having to take care of their own at home because they couldn't get the shit cheaper overseas anymore because they no longer had an empire, places like Britain and Spain and Belgium and Germany and on and on and on. Well, suddenly all those places had free college and Medicare for all and a UBI and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, man. Like I said, meet the new austerity, same as the old austerity. That absolutely sucked. Glad we got Biden, only in that we got some nicer tweets. I'm glad some people calmed the fuck down. But also mad that they're not calm because now they're too calm. Now they're like, oh yeah, I'd rather have a president be boring. Nope. You guys all went to sleep during Obama. The only public voices I saw during Obama were the likes of Cindy Sheehan and Medea Benjamin, handful of people, right? And they called those people racist because they protested Obama's bullshit wars. When Chris Hedges sued Obama over gutting habeas corpus and posse comitatus, people, lobbed the racist card at him. So there's all that. Folks, again, thebittertruth.info. Appreciate the support of the show. As I said, it's getting tough out there for people to do stuff like this, and whatever you can check in is appreciated. And support other shows, man, or at least subscribe and like them on YouTube to help the algorithm. I'm not even anywhere near a journalist. I don't consider myself an independent journalist. I consider myself a guy who runs a talk show. And I just like getting more interesting people on. And I like talking about stuff that you're not going to see on the Rachel Madcow show or the Sean Hannity Fuckhead News show, because they all get their talking points from the CIA. There's no pushback. They do not ask any questions of any military analyst or any of that kind of stuff. So again, appreciate the support of the show. And if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, as always, sleep tight.